He hears the crowd before he sees them. A man with tied arms is dragged into a town square and lashed onto a wooden wheel. The air smells like smoke and iron. An executioner raises a heavy bar. The first blow lands with a crack that silences the whispers. The second blow bends a limb in a direction it was never meant to go. Bones break, not all at once, but piece by piece, while the man is still alive and fully awake. The wheel turns. Another strike. The crowd flinches, then stares, because this is not a quick death. It is a lesson. The message is simple and brutal. This is what happens when you challenge power. The man groans, tries to speak, cannot. The executioner works with slow care, as if following a recipe. When it is finally over, the body is left on display above the road, so travelers will carry the story to the next village and the next. Pain is not an accident here. Pain is the product. Pain is the point. If this feels like a nightmare, it is also a mirror. Across empires and centuries, rulers shaped public life with public pain. They chose punishments that did not just kill, but spoke. Breaking on the wheel in parts of Europe, death by 1,000 cuts in imperial China, hanged, drawn, and quartered in England for treason, impalement along the road in Wallachia to scare invading armies. Whether every legend is perfectly true or half-true, the pattern is not in doubt. The state understood that a slow death could spread farther than any law. A slow death could move through a market, a church, a harbor, a battlefield, and settle in the mind. The body suffers once, the story suffers forever. That is why the hook of this history is not just the scream, it is the echo. Now the stakes. If rulers had not used these slow public deaths, many roads might have looked different. Power often sits on a thin line between fear and respect. Remove the fear, and rebellious nobles get bold. Remove the fear, and soldiers desert. Remove the fear, and rival faiths preach openly. These punishments were designed to hold that line. They were warnings for enemies and reminders for friends. They bought a season of order, sometimes only a season, by turning one body into a sign. But there is a second edge. The same spectacle that freezes a crowd today can stir it tomorrow. People remember. They talk. They start to ask whether a king who needs a wheel is a king who is weak. They begin to write laws that say, a state may punish but not torture. They begin to name a boundary, cruel and unusual. In that sense, every painful death is also a seed. It grows into fear, but it also grows into resistance. It grows into a new idea of justice. So this is not just a tour of horror. It is a tour of power. Each death we explore will show how pain was used like a tool, how it enforced order, started wars, ended wars, and then, over time, helped build a world that said, no more. If the wheel had not turned, if the cuts had not been counted, if the bodies had not been displayed, some laws we take for granted might never have arrived. But because they were, we can trace a hard line through history. From the square where a man breaks, to the courtroom where a judge says, this goes too far. That is why these stories matter. They tell us not only what rulers did to people, but what people eventually did to rulers.
He isn't the first, and he won't be the last. A ruler who feels his grip slipping does not give a speech. He gives the crowd a lesson. What follows are 10 lessons written on the body. Each one begins with a scene you could smell and hear if you stood too close. Each one explains who used it, why they used it, how it worked, what it changed, and why it still matters. Pain is the teacher, power is the subject, and the class is always full. On the wheel, a man's arms and legs are tied to the spokes like a cross pulled apart. An executioner swings an iron bar and breaks bones in a set order, turning the wheel to reach every limb. This was Europe's message to worst offenders for centuries. You did not just die, you were unmade. It punished murderers, rebels, and thieves who had become symbols. Authorities wanted fear to move faster than mercy. After the last blow, the broken body was raised as a sign at the edge of town. The wheel told everyone the same thing. Law can hurt longer than hate. The crowd learned. Then the rumor traveled further. In imperial China, a man bound to a post faced a different script. Lingchi, often called death by 1,000 cuts, mixed pain with shame. The cuts were not random. They followed a ritual meant for crimes like treason or killing a parent. The point was not only to end a life, but to erase honor and disturb the family's memory. In a world where the body after death mattered, this was a second death. The state showed that betrayal would be answered with careful pain. The shock of it crossed borders and centuries, turning into stories even after the practice ended. The lesson lingered long after the knives were put away. In England, the sentence for treason stacked pains on top of each other. A traitor was dragged through the streets, hanged but cut down alive, opened in the belly, and finally quartered. The crowd watched, the church prayed, and the crown spoke without words. Break faith and the nation breaks you. It was the theater of loyalty. Kings and parliaments used it in times of rebellion to harden soft edges. But the same spectacle that froze rebels also fed anger. Each public killing wrote a line in the long book that would one day argue for limits on punishment. Terror held the day, memory held the future. On the roads of Wallachia, long poles rose from the ground with bodies slumped on their tips. Impalement turned a frontier into a warning sign. Vlad III used it to stop invaders and to scare local rivals into silence. It was brutal, slow, and visible from far away. A wall built from fear when stone was too slow to lay. Armies found villages emptied by rumor alone. The method worked in the short term. Enemies kept their distance and thieves kept their heads down. But its shadow followed Vlad forever, proving that a ruler can win a week with terror and still lose a century of reputation. In Sicily, a story says a bronze bull stood above a fire. A victim locked inside screamed as the metal heated, and the sound came out like the bellow of an animal. Whether the tale is fully true or part legend, it shows something real about power. Cruelty loves a stage. The tyrant in the story didn't just want to kill, he wanted to turn pain into music. That detail, the shaped sound, explains why this myth survived. People remember craft applied to harm. They whisper it as a warning about leaders who turn punishment into art. Even if the bull never roared, the idea of it kept roaring in the human mind. On a quiet riverbank, two boats meet to make a coffin. A man is trapped between them, fed just enough to keep suffering, smeared with sweet food to attract insects. The sun does the rest. This is scaphism, told by ancient writers and doubted by many modern ones. But the doubt is also a lesson. Power loves to exaggerate its reach. It spreads tales of punishments so awful that truth does not matter. If people believe the story works. Real or not, the boats teach us how fear moves. By picture, by rumor, by the mouth of a traveler. Sometimes power needs only your belief to hurt you. On a ship, the sea itself became the whip. A sailor tied with ropes was dragged under the keel and pulled across barnacles and beams. Keel hauling was rare but unforgettable. It served as a floating court's last warning. Discipline over death unless death came anyway. Captains used the threat to keep crews in line on long voyages where boredom and hunger could turn men against each other. The ocean made the sentence feel bigger than any judge. The cold, dark under the hull felt like a set of jaws. Sailors told the story in ports. Parents told it to boys who dreamed of running away. The Navy kept order with a ghost. On dry land, the stake raised its own ghost. Fire wrapped a body in slow light while the town looked on. Heretics, witches, and rebels faced flames that could be seen from every corner. The pain was not only heat, it was time. Moments stretched, and with them stretched the warning. The faith and the law are one, and both will burn you if you break them. But the burning also planted doubt. Some watchers felt the heat as a question. If our truth needs this flame, how strong is our truth? Over years, that question grew roots, feeding reforms that traded the fire for faster ends. In a stone chamber, a man is tied to a wooden frame. A crank turns. His joints lengthen beyond what skin and sinew can bear. The rack promised confessions and sometimes delivered only broken bodies. It sat at the center of many courts as a tool to pull words from silence. But pain-made words are weak foundations. They crumble under a new wind, and history looks back and sees a lie. The rack shows a state's impatient hunger for certainty. It also shows why later law leaned toward rules that kept confessions cleaner and shorter, so truth would not bleed out before it reached the page. Elsewhere, a prisoner is stripped and the skin is taken off in pieces. Flaying is a word people hate to hear because the image enters the body through the mind. When rulers used it, they were not just killing, they were drawing a map of power on a person. It was a sentence against enemies who needed to become warnings. City gates were the proof. The method survived as a whisper more than a record because people could not forget it even when they wanted to. Flaying reveals the simplest math of cruelty. The fewer the words, the deeper the memory. It is fear reduced to a single line. 10 segments, 10 ways to bend the will of a population by breaking the body of a single person. Under the wheel, inside the bull, over the stake, beneath the keel. Every method turned pain into policy. Some were common, some rare, some disputed, some certain, but all worked the same social nerve. They promised calm in return for screams. They bought order at the market price of mercy. And each one, in its own time, helped write the argument against itself. The more a ruler needed these lessons, the more people learned another one. There must be a line power cannot cross. They called it justice, but it was really a language. Pain was the grammar. Spectacle was the punctuation. Once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Rulers did not only punish people, they broadcast messages. A slow death in the square told every home that the state could reach inside your skin and write its rules there. That is the first system explainer. Pain as policy. You make one person suffer in public so 10,000 behave in private. The tools change, wheel, stake, rack, but the purpose repeats. Humiliation is not a side effect. It is the design. Bodies are displayed, parts are sent to city gates, names are read out loud. The lesson is meant to travel like smoke. Fear moves faster than law, and fear does not need to be literate. It needs only eyes and ears. In that world, rumor becomes a deputy of the crown. People police one another because they dread becoming the next example. Power spends one life to buy many quiet days, but systems do not stand still. The second explainer is the shift from spectacle to clean killing, and then to the idea that cruelty should be limited by law. Crowds that once leaned in to watch began to turn away. Markets and churches did not want execution days to swallow their streets. Doctors and lawyers stepped forward to say that pain does not prove truth, that punishment can be quick and still be firm. Governments found that public horror sometimes sparked riot, not respect. So punishments moved behind walls. The language changed from shame him before all to process him according to code. Tools changed too. A drop, a blade, a bullet, fast ends that left less to see, less to gossip about. Then came a new word on paper, cruel, then another, unusual. Together they drew a line and said, beyond this line is not justice, but abuse. The message did not disappear. It moved into whispers of surveillance and cells. Still control, fewer screams.